Welcome here, everyone. We're just going to give a couple minutes to let everybody get in. Thanks for joining us for round two. We got lots of questions that we want to answer with you. So everybody just hang in there and we'll get everybody in. While you're waiting for us, if you wouldn't mind just throwing in the chat box where you're from and introduce yourself to the group. Thank you, thank you. Hey everyone, if you're just joining us, introduce yourself in the chat box. We're going to get started here in just 1 minute. We're going to make sure everybody gets in. Thanks for joining us. Lots of familiar faces. There's still time if you want to share this link with a friend or a colleague to get them to join. Feel free. We're going to do the full time with Q&A. We've got lots of great questions that need to be answered still, and I'm sure there'll be time for some more questions. So feel free to invite a colleague, and we'll kick off in just a second here. All right, Corinne, why don't we kick this off? I'm sure lots of people will join as we go through. So Corinne, let's do this.
Great. So I just would like to introduce again Steve Adelman, who's joining us, and we're going to be having a conversation, answering questions about what comes next in the grand reopening. So just a reminder that Steve is from Adelman Law Group in Scottsdale, Arizona, and he's the Vice President of the Event Safety Alliance, and we're happy to have him here to join us today. Just a reminder, if you're an ILEA member, to please log on to ILEA Hub and click login and update your contact info, so we know that things are changing and your contact info might have changed. So please give us the best way to connect with you via email would be great, to make sure you get access to all of our resources and webinars that are coming up. And again, if you need any support, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of your ILEA leadership. We are here for you to help you through this hard time. On to Steve.
All right, let's do this thing. Thanks, Corinne. So this is the follow-up to the hour of fun and frolic that we had just 2 days ago. So we did not get to all of your questions, and Corinne emailed me a bunch of them. Here you can see what I'm going to be reading off of, and I'm going to try and answer some more of your questions because they're good questions, and I was pretty impressed. So let's see what we can cover. Corinne categorized these, so I'm reading them in the order in which I received them. If it sounds like I'm starting with a plug for the Event Safety Alliance, don't blame me. Corinne, she did this. So we'll start with 2 questions. One, will the Event Safety Alliance Guide to Recovery, which I discussed last time and which you are all invited to contribute to on the front end, and please God, read it when it comes out, not later than May 11. But if you want to contribute, go to our website, eventsafetyalliance.org, and you'll see a button right in the middle of the homepage to contribute. So back to the question, will the Event Safety Alliance Guide to Recovery be free or for purchase or for members only? and be updated with current CDC, WHO, and Johns Hopkins guidelines. That's a nice two-part question. Sounds like you watch a lot of media. We're about free right now, because people in the live event industry, unless you're secretly wealthy, we're not working. And by we, Corrine reminded me to say, that includes me. My clients are all in this industry. So the reason I have time to do a follow-up webinar is because I don't have any paid work. So if you have any legal work that you would like done, I'm available, because all I'm doing right now is writing guidance and talking on webinars like this. So the Guide to Recovery will be free and free for everyone. The idea is that we want everyone to be healthy and safe, because if we open in a manner that doesn't get people sick, that will push the door open a little bit farther and farther and farther. There is no incentive whatsoever to hide guidance. To the contrary, as soon as we make this thing go live, get it for yourself, pass it to your friends and colleagues. Let's get this information out there as widely as humanly possible. Will it be updated with current CDC, WHO, and Johns Hopkins guidelines? Yes, we actually have links to various pieces of information that we've relied on, and we will include the most current links. Really, the point of that is we're going to send you to the right place, and the link itself updates every day, because that's what these authoritative medical resources are doing. They're updating every single day, which is why they're so useful. So that was question 1. 2, I see there is a conference for Event Safety Alliance in November in Pennsylvania. Will this be available on video conference? Yeah, it's actually going to be only a video conference this year. We do a terrific 3-day plus 2 additional days of training in Lidditz, Pennsylvania, at a really cool venue called Rock Lidditz. And it's informative, it's fun, it's great networking. It's 400 plus people, all of whom are deeply immersed in live events. And so we all geek out together, and it's great. I mean, frankly, it's the highlight of my year. It doesn't make sense to do it this year, either because it still won't be safe to gather in groups of 400 plus people, and so we're all going to stay home because we want to be safe and smart, or by some miracle it will be safe to get back together, in which case no one's coming to Lidditz for a conference. We're all going to be working our tails off trying to catch up from months of being unemployed, and again, that includes me. So I have no intention of coming to Lidditz this year. We're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it as a free benefit for ESA members. And the good news about that is membership in the Event Safety Alliance, we dropped it to $25 a year. So that's your plug. If you want to benefit from the Event Safety Summit every year, which is really cool and it's going to be great this year too, just different, membership in our organization is $25. So you can splurge on that. Even I can splurge on that. So there's the plug part. Section 2, legal. And these are, again, Corinne's titles, so blame her. If the Apple/Google contact tracing, which I referred to 2 days ago, or any tracing mechanism, determines that an outbreak likely occurred at your event, is this enough cause to result in legal action being taken against you? Wow, that is a great question. Let me give you the, sort of the starter answer, and then I'll address it substantively. The starter answer is, if you do anything at all, if you wake up in the morning, can you get sued for that? Yes. You can get sued for breathing. You can get sued for looking funny. Really, the question is, if you get sued, will you win? So there. Put aside the actual question. Now let's deal with, I think, what the question really was asking, which is, if it turns out that there's some evidence of contagion at your event, what's your legal liability? What's your exposure? And the answer to that is, in traditional lawyer language, it depends. So what does it depend on? What does your legal exposure depend on if your event turns out to have some indication of coronavirus? It depends on whether you made your venue reasonably safe and hygienic for your reasonably foreseeable demographic. In other words, it depends on what you did. So if you took reasonable health and safety measures, whatever reasonable is under your circumstances at the time that we're talking about, so those are all facts that I can't fill in right now in a webinar, but if you behaved reasonably under your own circumstances, then notwithstanding that there was contagion, you'll probably do just fine in a lawsuit because, well, it's COVID-19. We know it's contagious. It's one of the very few things we do know about it. And so the fact that it occurs at your event is not going to rock anyone's world. What would rock someone's world is if you were cavalier about health and safety. Now, I'm pretty confident that if you're watching this webinar, you're not going to be cavalier about health and safety. And well, if you were thinking about just kind of winging it, you know, if you were a close follower of the words of the mayor of Las Vegas, I really strongly suggest that you rethink that position because that will get you into legal trouble. So, short answer, if you take reasonable measures to make your event healthy and safe, even if, God forbid, there is contagion, your legal exposure is limited. It's not a perfect answer, there's no perfect defense, but that's how the legal issue would work. Next, this is an insurance question. Do you think that rates will now skyrocket for liability insurance? Yes. And will $5 million or even $10 million of coverage be enough for general liability? That's going to depend. It really depends on the size of your event. Candidly, this is a prediction. I don't think that the required levels of coverage are going to rise. I mean, everyone is going to be under enormous financial pressure even to restart. So it doesn't make any sense to make it harder to restart than it's already going to be. I don't foresee, what is currently a $1 million or $2 million requirement rising to $5 or $10 million, except for the largest events, and they're probably already at $5 million. Do I think rates are going to rise? Yeah, I do, because insurance companies are paying more out, even if they're not paying on business cancellation claims like I discussed last time. They're paying for defense lawyers to defend them in all the lawsuits that are being filed about coverage. So there are going to be fewer insurers getting into the liability insurance marketplace, I would guess, and consequently, I do expect that rates will rise. Will they skyrocket? I don't know, but I do expect that they will rise some. Next legal question. I'm already in contract with 12 clients. Can I ask them all to sign a hold harmless addendum before we move forward with producing their events? What happens if they don't agree to sign this? Well, if you're in contract already, you can ask whatever you want, but they don't have to agree and you still have a binding contract. Now, that's the legal answer. The practical answer is more nuanced, which is everything right now is negotiable because right now nothing's happening and everyone's hurting and everyone wants to get back to whatever is the new normal. So you can ask and you probably should ask. All they can do is say no, in which case you have to decide, do you want to go on with the event as currently contracted, or do you want to cancel and basically dare them to sue you? Chances are, if it's not a huge event, they're not going to sue you. But my advice and the way I try to practice law and frankly deal with humans is just be nice. If you've got an issue, talk to them. Tell them what your issue is and what your concern is and see if you can work something out. I I just think that's the right way to behave. And so if you take seriously the idea, the thing we always say these days, which is we're all in this together. If you take that seriously, as I do, I'd call the 12 people with whom you have contracts already, say, look, this is a difficult situation. We do want to put on your event, but we don't want to be completely exposed to risk. Would you consider signing indemnity and hold harmless language? We'll try to make it as painless as possible, but we can't be left completely holding the bag here. Parenthetically, there are some responsibilities that, depending on your role in the event creation process, you shouldn't be passing on to someone else. If, for example, you represent the venue and you have the cleaning service, you shouldn't be trying to get someone else to indemnify you if the space isn't clean and hygienic. So I guess what I'm saying there is, yeah, everything is probably negotiable right now, but try not to be really horrible about it if you have more leverage than your counterpart. Take responsibility for the things that you control. My rule of thumb is authority should align with responsibility, meaning if you have the authority to do something, you should bear the responsibility for doing it correctly. That's how I write contracts and how I edit them. So I suggest that you do the same with yours. That's the legal section. Now there's one which is entitled Liability/Transfer of Risk. This is kind of long. I'll read it slowly. As an event producer, we can control the risk as much as possible through hygiene, security, and social distancing measures. True. At what point does the attendee accept/should accept the transfer of risk associated with attending the event? Let me stop there for a second. That's a really sophisticated question. Another plug for the Event Safety Alliance's guidance. Just this morning, actually, I finally put onto paper what I've been referring to as a social contract. So you're familiar with a waiver of liability. Somebody wants to participate in an activity that is at least potentially dangerous, and you ask them to sign a document in which they completely absolve you of any responsibility in case they get hurt or something goes sideways. COVID-19 is not going to be a waiver of liability situation, because you can only knowingly waive something that you fully understand. That's the way the law works. We don't know everything about coronavirus and how contagious exactly it is. Clearly, there are widely varying beliefs about that, notwithstanding what the scientists say. So the document that I have drafted, which again will be part of the guidance that you are invited, that I am inviting you to collaborate on, it basically is notice. So again, the social contract is the idea that everyone plays a role in things going correctly. So in this case, the document begins, I acknowledge that by leaving my house, I am taking on some risk that I wouldn't be taking on if I stayed in my house, which I think is pretty basic threshold argument, but is essential to note because staying home is actually still an option and will remain an option even as, governors and provincial leaders and other municipal officials say, I'm taking the gloves off. You can reopen. Doesn't mean it's a good idea. Each and every person still gets to make the decision on their own whether they want to go out and risk becoming sick, just like every event professional gets to make the decision on their own. Once it's legal to do so, do I want to reopen? Do I want to go back to work? Do I want to be in close contact with people who may or may not be engaging in proper health and safety practices? So staying home is an option worth acknowledging. The next thing is, we want patrons to acknowledge that if you have a health and safety program for your event, for your venue, and please, God, do have one, make sure it's written. And if you need help with that, Adelman@adelmanlawgroup.com. I will help you with it, because the very last thing you want to do is reopen without any health and safety plan, because that is a very direct path to getting people sick and getting yourself sued. So back to the social contract, you want your patrons to acknowledge that they will follow your rules. And if your rules say that they have to, have a thermometer gun across their forehead or walk through something that takes their temperature, they have to do that. If you require them to wear a mask, they have to do that. You want their acknowledgement to all of your health and safety rules, which you will post very visibly on walls, on websites, on social media platforms, every place. Slap it on the forehead of a kid standing out front. Make sure that you have someone with some amount of medical training wearing scrubs outside the points of ingress, standing there making sure that everyone goes through your, not security checkpoint, that's different, your health and hygiene checkpoint. So I believe in committing patrons to them adhering to your rules. So step one is have clear rules. Step two, train your people to enforce those clear rules. Step three, publicize your clear rules so that, step four, you can reasonably ask patrons to commit to following your clear rules. Got all that? So that's the answer to at what point does the attendee should accept the transfer of risk. It's not a complete transfer of risk, because every event professional still bears the responsibility, the legal duty of care to provide reasonably safe premises under their circumstances. Well, the circumstances are COVID-19 is highly contagious. Reasonable people should not deny that fact, because it's true. So that remains your duty, you as an event professional, that remains your duty of care, regardless of what patrons agree to. They can't agree to enter unsafe premises and assume the risk of that. In legal terms, providing safe and hygienic premises is called a non-delegable duty. So you cannot delegate to a patron, a worker, an artist, anyone. You cannot legally delegate the duty that you always bear to provide safe, secure, and hygienic premises. You can't ask patrons to waive that duty. That's always your duty, no matter what a patron would agree to. So there's your free legal advice for today. Related, again, this is a long and sophisticated question. What can be done to legally protect the production company or agency or person delivering the event should an attendee or contractor willingly choose to attend or work at the event and they become ill after attending the event? Well, that's actually very similar to the question I answered earlier, which is anybody can sue for anything. The litmus test about your exposure is, did you behave reasonably under the circumstances, which in this case are, we're dealing with a very contagious disease, which everyone at your venue on any given day or night has voluntarily elected to confront. So everyone bears some legal responsibility. In fact, I think I said this on Tuesday, whatever day it was. Everyone, so now I'm going to recite another legal standard, everyone bears the legal duty to behave as a reasonable person under their own circumstances. Patrons have a duty to behave as reasonable patrons. If a reasonable patron at your venue has to wear a mask and gloves and not have a temperature or symptoms, then someone who violates that will not have a legal claim against you because they didn't behave reasonably under their circumstances. For workers, you may require them to wear gloves and a mask, but some things are technical and require, a good touch, or, the ability to breathe without their glasses getting fogged up. So you can have rules, but they have to be reasonable under the circumstances. So what can be done to legally protect you? Behave reasonably under the particular circumstances of a patron, a worker, an artist, an event operator like yourself. That's the answer. Next, government mandates. Love this question. Is it reasonable to open under the guidelines of a state or provincial government if the local municipality suggests to stay closed? Can refusing to host an event be a breach of contract? Let's take those one at a time. Is it reasonable to open under the guidelines of a local entity if the local entity suggests to stay closed? Well, you're taking your chances. And if you were my client, I would advise you not to open if the local official says to stay closed. Seems like kind of asking for trouble. I know, economically, I know we're hurting. Psychologically, I know that we all want to get the hell out of our houses and back to work and seeing people. But you don't want to get people sick. That's bad. It's immoral. It's legally wrong. It's going to get your business shut down for a hell of a lot longer, if not closed permanently. Make a smart decision. You know what municipal officials are leaning towards. Most of them are leaning towards opening sooner rather than later. So if you are even ahead of your local municipal officials, pump the brakes. Pump the brakes. Give it a little more time. You're gonna reopen soon because that's what everyone wants. But you want to reopen with some cover, at the very least, with the cover of your local government officials who say it's okay, in our opinion, for you to consider reopening. If you get ahead of your local officials, wow, I would have to hear why you think that's a good idea before I could say that I agree. Because at least based on that question, I wouldn't do it. Related, can refusing to host an event be a breach of contract? Sure it can. But this is back to what is force majeure. If hosting an event is either illegal, because people cannot congregate in groups of a certain size, or if it would be impracticable because you could not host the event safely, then that's not breach, that's force majeure. Force majeure simply excuses the contract for both parties. So refusing to host an event can be breach only if it is healthy and safe and you just blow off the contract. But that gets back to my earlier comment about everything is negotiable right now. If you really don't want to put on the event and your local officials say, it's okay with us if you do the event, you're in Vegas and you just heard your mayor yesterday saying crazy things, then I would talk to your contract counterpart and have a grown-up discussion about the risks that you're willing to take and whether everyone else in your business, on your professional team, is willing to take those same risks. I suspect that opening up the conversation to enough people who have a vested interest is going to lead you to making a smarter decision. Health and safety. Do you foresee health and safety standards changing down the line when things reopen, i.e., hand sanitizer dispensers are legally mandatory, enforced socially distanced fixed seating, masks and gloves for staff and attendees, elimination of buffet style F&B, etc. Let's break that down because it's asking kind of two different things. Do I foresee health and safety standards changing? Yeah, but let's use the word standards in a precise manner. There's something called the standard of care. Basically, it's what is reasonable under the circumstances, kind of writ large. So what's the industry doing? What are people who make sense doing in kind of this collective view? I firmly believe, here's my bottle of Purell, which happens to live on the shelf right behind me. I firmly believe that having bottles of hand sanitizer, wipes, requiring people to wear masks where it's appropriate, I think all that is going to become standard behavior for the next year or so, and the or so will end when there's a vaccine that really has wiped out coronavirus and we can stop thinking about it in any respect whatsoever. Until then, I think it's just going to become standard behavior, and your patrons and workers will expect to see your wipes, hand sanitizer, army of people wiping things down, making sure that, there is no food being passed along, no buffets. People are going to expect to see that. It's not going to require an act of Congress, because there's not going to be one, or even an act of your state legislature. That's going to take too long. When you reopen, the expectations will be different. Get in front of that now. Whether you're planning to reopen, immediately or within the next month or the next few months, prepare now for the new normal. The new normal is going to include visible standards of cleanliness and hygiene and attention to those that people have never asked for before. But now, if it looks like your venue or your event isn't clean and hygienic, people are going to leave. And that's just a business reality. So, do I foresee health and safety standards changing? Yes. But that's going to be led by the expectation of patrons and workers, and really everybody who's on this webinar. Your expectations doubtless have already changed. I know mine have. Would there be different regulations for corporate, public, or private events such as weddings? No. Human bodies are susceptible to coronavirus just the same ways, whether they're, whether those people are wearing a business suit or at a wedding where they're wearing a tuxedo or a beautiful wedding dress. So no, I expect the standards and, more importantly, the expectations to be the same at every public accommodation. Starting with restaurants and places where you can get your hair and nails done, and movie theaters, because that's the insane place that we're starting. Moving on to page 2. If we offer temperature taking staff for future events, what certifications, if any, would they need? This is a very good question to which I don't have a great answer. Frankly, that's the next issue that I'm up to, and a friend of mine who is smart about a bunch of things turns out to be really smart about this issue and sent me a very attachment-heavy email early this morning. Candidly, I haven't gotten time to read it yet. So my answer is, come back to me on this one for certifications. I don't have a good answer yet. But let me address the question of who should take temperatures and check for visible signs of illness. Let me address it this way. You currently have a basic set of resources. So for most events, there would be some kind of security at whatever point of ingress you have. So one option is to kind of deputize whatever security you have at ingress to use a thermometer gun or monitor health. Frankly, I don't think that's the way I would go unless there was no other option whatsoever. What I know from talking to some of my friends who are involved in different aspects of medicine is their staffs are relatively underemployed unless they're working in a hospital, in which case they're so busy, don't bother them with any of your stuff. But for people who are like dental hygienists or phlebotomists working in a regular doctor's office, they have some medical training, at least enough to, accurately read a thermometer, and, they can recognize the symptoms of fever, or somebody who's trying to, suppress their cough into their arm. I would see if you can make friends with that kind of person, because they've got some medical training and they don't already have a job to do that remains important. Security is important. And, we all risk getting so drawn to the shiny object du jour, coronavirus, that we forget about all the other stuff that still matters. Security is one of the other things that still matters. So unless you have a security guard who volunteers and who has some appropriate training, my own thought is I would try to find someone who has some medical training, who has scrubs that they can wear, who can be posted out front of whatever is your new limited number of points of ingress, who can check everyone before they walk in the door. As for certification, get back to me and I'll have an answer, but I don't have one today. Next question. How will rental companies clean their equipment and certify it disinfected / clean? I don't know, but I think that's a great question. And if I had a business that used rental equipment, I sure as hell would be asking this good question. So I'm going to read this question again. And if you're inclined to write it down, I think this is a question for each of you to ask your vendor before you accept delivery of their rental equipment. So here's the question. How will rental companies clean their equipment and certify that it is disinfected or clean? There's not going to be some certification, there's not a good housekeeping seal of approval that, suddenly exists. But what you want to know is, what's their cleaning practices? And the reason you want to know that is you want to reassure your own staff, who are going to be the ones to handle this stuff. And you want to be able to reassure patrons, because you can be confident that at least in the initial phases, as people start to do stuff in public again, there's going to be someone asking. I would do it. I would definitely do it. But there's going to be somebody who is finicky enough about safety and hygiene on a normal basis. They are going to be hyper vigilant, and it's a fair question. So you want to have an answer. My last question on this list, and then I'll turn it back to these guys to pose additional questions that you've asked today. So here's the last question that I had as of yesterday. Are there thoughts about what distancing within an event are likely to look like? Wow. Let's keep going. Or what the Event Safety Alliance will be recommending with regard to social distancing for ingress and egress, lobbies, restrooms, concessions, fixed seating, reception style, or free movement events, presumably general admission, and emergencies when things start to reopen. What should we be thinking about in reducing capacity in rooms? So there are two issues there. Damn, you guys keep packing multiple questions into each line. First is, how do you maintain social distancing in, generally speaking, open areas? So there are a lot of open areas at most events. Points of ingress, before people enter, they're queued up, they're waiting. And now you're going to have a line that everyone has to stop in, because my recommendation, I think any reasonable person would suggest, that you have someone checking temperature and looking for signs and symptoms of illness. And if somebody shows symptoms of illness, thank them for coming and turn them away very quickly. Which means you're going to have a line waiting outside, so you want to have line control. As a point of reference, I will cite and praise my local Costco. The Costco here in Scottsdale, Arizona, did a really good job. Frankly, I was terrified to go to Costco, but I needed stuff. I was out of paper towels, and there were just some things I needed. So I went there and bit the bullet. And lo and behold, Costco, they have a lot of bike rack. And they use bike rack to stretch it along the sidewalk, making sure that none of us were waiting in the parking lot and getting mowed down by, minivans and SUVs. So they queued us up. They kept us in line by bike rack, and they maintained social distance by very friendly Costco greeters, carrying, hand sanitizer and wipes, walking up and down the line, thanking us for coming. Thanking us for coming and reminding us to maintain social distancing, but they were doing the classic guest services thing. They were making us feel safer by being friendly and visible and present. And it was brilliant, and it worked really, really well. So I recommend the Costco model. Bike rack, gaff tape on the floor. If you're in a wood floor venue, that works. If you're in a green field, white tape, just like every football coach puts on the ground before Saturday game or Friday night, whatever your local thing is. There are lots of ways to create lines, stanchions with tensor barrier. You know what these things are. Creating lines. Now, where do you have to create lines? So one is the new line that's waiting outside, making sure again that you don't queue people up in harm's way, because that'll be a nasty unintended consequence. Once you get people inside, really depends on the type of event you have. So if you have an event, you're bringing a rock and roll band, fantastic. You found someone willing to perform for, half a house worth of people. They're looking to make some money on merch. Well, now you've got to have a merchandise line which is socially distant. You probably want to post everything that's available at the merch table online so that people can look on their cell phone and decide what they want before they get up to the line. Then they're not going to pick stuff up. They're not. If it's really a rock show, they're looking at t-shirts hanging on a wall anyway. So the only people who are going to touch those shirts will be staff. They'll be merch sellers. So that's fairly easy to solve. How about F&B? Well, draft beer, that's going to be a challenge that will have a solution later or maybe not. So let's just talk about bottled beverages and food. There cannot be touching. No touching. This is going to be a very puritanical place that we're going to live in for a while. So nobody touches each other. Items will be taken from the back, from the kitchen or from a food storage refrigerator case and placed on the counter. And at that point on the counter, the patron can pick up their stuff. And it can only be one person at the counter at a time, or one family group, one related group of people, because again, you got to maintain social distancing. How do you do that? Well, again, the Costco model is pretty instructive. Friendly guest services people walking around saying, we're so glad that you're coming. Please buy as much, F&B as you can choke down. But we need you to wait back away from the people who are actually picking up their stuff. And, we'll make sure that you get next in line if that's where you're located. Once again, unintended consequences, you have to make sure that people don't queue up for F&B, for merch, in a way that makes the fire marshal crazy and blocks people from walking past. Queuing is going to be a problem. It just is. Lots of venues and events are tightly spaced, and you're going to have to get past that. For GA events, you can at least remove tables and chairs and other furniture, and you're going to have to do that. For fixed seating events, you're going to have to kill seats. You're just going to have to. How do you know how many pieces of furniture to remove, how many seats to kill? That's a conversation for you to have with your local public health and public safety officials. I'm a lawyer. I'm pretty smart about this stuff and getting smarter all the time, but God knows I don't have medically relevant answers to anything. But there are people who do, and they are your municipal health and safety officials. I would make good friends with them. Bring them food. Everybody likes food. Make sure you deliver it in a health and safety way. But you want advice about how many spaces to kill. You want advice about how many people can you let in, what percentage of your total possible capacity can you have now? I can't give you that advice, but your local public safety and public health officials can. And so I recommend talking to them. So with that, I've exhausted my questions. So Corrine, if you want to pose some more,
Sure.
I will answer as long as we have.
I've got a nice long multi-phase question that you love so much. So when COVID-19 first began to roll out, the CDC and WHO was recommending that event organizers require guests to share where they are staying during the event prior to their admittance to the event to aid with the tracking should there be an incident. While I can see the importance of this, I also see concern from the side of the potential attendee if data was mishandled and information about where they were to go and information about where they were going out and created some other issue. Is it enforceable within a health and safety policy?
So what we're talking about here is contact tracing and privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Contact tracing is going to be really important. The reason for that is we're not going to have a vaccine for more than a year. So our reality is going to start with, we don't have nearly enough testing, and there is going to be some very significant number of people who are contagious but asymptomatic. And so, because you don't know who's got coronavirus in them right now, you want to have contact tracing. I don't have a good answer to this. I'm just going to comment. This is now editorializing. I have thought about this, and I'm actually speaking on another webinar in an hour with somebody who's going to talk about contact tracing technology. And I'm eager to hear what he's got to say. I have privacy concerns. Candidly, I don't readily trust either government or private entities to have lots of private information about my life. I post pretty sparingly on social media for a reason. My friends know a lot about me, but social media is not the place that I want to broadcast my personal life. Do I have reluctance about contact tracing? Yes. Will I readily give over will I install the app so that I can have contact tracing on my phone? You bet. And the reason is, if I had to choose between preserving as much privacy as I have right now or dying, yeah, I guess I'll sacrifice some privacy. There's going to be a sliding scale there, and everyone has to make their own determination. But based on what I currently know about the sacrifice of privacy that I'd be asked to make, I currently am prepared to make the decision that contact tracing is more benefit to me than burden on my privacy. Again, we all get to make that decision, but that's the analysis.
Mm-hmm. And then, does having an established data privacy policy and handling procedure protect the organizer, or is a higher level of protocol required?
Yeah, as an event organizer, unless you're in a technology company and kind of glommed onto this webinar, it's not going to be an issue for you. You're not going to have contact tracing from your wedding or bar mitzvah, or rock show or whatever it is that you're doing. It's not going to be your thing. It's going to be something that participants, attendees, workers, artists opt into or not.
Great. Any thoughts on providing information attendees for corporate events revealing healthcare status, test results within some time? Should attendees anticipate a requirement to divulge such information?
I think it's fair. Again, there's, a lot of these things are sliding scales, especially when they come to privacy. This question basically asks people to waive their HIPAA rights. HIPAA is the federal law that protects people's personal health and medical information from public disclosure without authorization by the patient. Again, there's a continuum there between safety, on one hand versus privacy on the other. And, I guess I don't have a good answer to that. If you're organizing corporate events and you want to try asking people for their recent medical history, you can give that a shot. There'll be people who scream bloody murder, depending on where in North America you're located. That could be a huge barrier to getting people to come to your event. I suspect everyone would have some reluctance. So if you're inclined to go down that road, start drafting your specific reasons for needing each piece of information that you're going to ask for, because you're going to get pushback.
And then similarly, is there a threshold of going too far with these sort of precautions like you outlined? Like having a health and safety security check that turns someone away who's just coughing, sneezing due to allergies. Like they claim that. How do you handle a situation like that?
That goes back to why I think security guards are a last resort, as the person standing out front checking temperature and making medical evaluations. I'd really want it to be someone who has some medical training, someone who can legitimately wear scrubs and look like it's their own clothing. I couldn't do it. It's not my training. That's the best answer I have.
Great. Someone's from Austin and said, we have outdoor farmers markets that are still operating, but with social distancing measures in place. Do you think they're putting themselves at risk of lawsuits given the fact that their insurance likely doesn't cover them for pandemics? Or do you think they will be the litmus test for small events that could possibly emulate their efforts once restrictions are eased, if everything runs smoothly at these farmers markets?
Good question, Austin. And speaking from Scottsdale, Arizona, we have farmers markets too. There's one around the corner from where I live now, and it's very small. And what they've done is they allow people to pick up their stuff only once the farmers market people put it into a bag or other container and push it across the table. I don't know what your farmer's market is doing, but I'm guessing it's something along those lines to minimize contact and maximize social distancing. Basically, the standard's going to be the same for, outdoor farmers markets as for every place else. The legal standard is always the same and worth repeating. Are you behaving reasonably under your circumstances? So in the circumstance of it's an outdoor space, you can take more space. You can require 10 feet of social distancing. You can, somebody who's loading peppers into a basket can load them into a basket with their back to the patron, take a broomstick and push them across the table, maintaining not less than a broomstick length of distance between themselves and the patron. All that stuff can be done. And all of it would minimize the legal exposure that anyone would have. This is a time to get creative. My broomstick example it sounds silly, but it would work. And so it's probably worth trying.
Okay, one question, one final question. There's a few more. We'll send them to you, and then maybe we can include them when we post later. So one last question. Somebody would love to know what type of signage to post before attendees enter that basically states they're accepting the risk by entering or to agree to abide by social distancing. How would you phrase that?
Wow. I am definitely
Everybody's eagerly
punting.
writing this down.
No, I'm definitely punting on that question. I mean, to be honest, that's a level of detail. I get paid for that. So if you want that answer, I'm glad to give it. But you got to get it the old-fashioned way. That's actually asking for legal advice. And of course, the old-fashioned way is to pay for it. So, again, sadelman@adelmanlawgroup.com. That's how you get that level of detail in your
Amazing.
signage. Good question.
Perfect. Yes, it is. Back to Dustin. Thank you very much, Stephen. And Dustin's just going to wrap up for us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steve. There was a couple questions we didn't get to. We'll make sure we get some quick answers on those and send them out to you directly. Again, thanks, Steve, for taking the time to do this a second time. I found this to be just as informative and great as the first run. So just before everybody runs away to their next meetings that I'm sure are happening in a couple minutes, we just want to tell you about some of our upcoming webinars. So the first one here is Clear Head, Strong Mind. If you've been joining us for this, they are an incredible opportunity to end the week with some positivity and some tips for life. So that one will go tomorrow at 3 p.m. Central. Angela Braun, as always, is our series facilitator. We're also bringing in Mike Dew, the founder of Revive Fitness, and he is going to be talking about how to optimize your stress. So please go on over to ILEA Hub and get registered for that. And then next up, next week, we have Crisis Communications in the Time of COVID-19 with Alex Plaxon. Many of you probably know Alex or have seen him speak before. So he's put together a program for us. That will be on Tuesday, April 28th at 1 p.m. Central. Again, just head over to ileahub.com to pre-register for that. These webinars can be found on the COVID crisis page. I think that's what it's called. And it's located on the top bar of the website if you were looking for them. And then Tuesday, May 5th, we've got Steve Kimball, who's a longtime friend of ILEA, talking about proactively preparing for the future of events. Registration will open for that tomorrow, so just keep your eye out and we will share that as we go. The best place to find all of these resources, including recordings from today's session with Steve, is to head over to the COVID resource page on ileahub.com. We post all the resources from webinars and also watch the ILEA Facebook group. One last time, we're going to ask you to please update your contact information. We will not stop asking this until you do it, so it's just better to go and get it done. Simply log into ileahub.com. The very first thing that will pop up is a form for you to update your information. Once we have that, we can stop asking this question. I just want to thank Steve again one more time. We really appreciate everything that you've offered to us. It's been an incredible amount of time and we really do appreciate it. Contact information for Steve will be posted on our resource page. So if anybody needs any further advice, Steve is your guy. And yeah, this has been really amazing. Thank you, Steve, for everything.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow for Clear Head, Strong Mind. That is it. That was great.
Cool.
So many good questions.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, those are really good questions.